And so changes in how the government is to be run begin to be put into place, and this allows the interests of the majority of the French people to begin to be represented. Here's an actual picture, a drawing of the tennis court oath, and it's obviously taken from the standpoint of the Third Estate, and it shows how individuals are attempting to negotiate a resolution to the problem in a way that meets the interests of most of the people of the French country. Here's some examples, some quotes actually taken from the tennis court oath. The first one, the National Assembly, considering that it has been summoned to establish the constitution of the kingdom to effect the regeneration of the public order. So because of the ongoing chaos that had been created from the period of the Great Fear with famine and drought having taken place, and to maintain the true principles of monarchy, that nothing can prevent it from continuing its deliberations in whatever place it may be forced to establish itself. So already the Third Estate, which has declared itself to be the National Assembly, is recognizing that it has to continue and it may be forced into extreme circumstances and into different locations in order to resolve what it sees as the ongoing dilemma of the French country. And so it states finally that wheresoever its members are assembled, there is the National Assembly. Another quote suggests, decrees that all members of this assembly shall immediately take a solemn oath not to separate and to reassemble wherever circumstances require until the constitution of the kingdom is established and consolidated upon firm foundations, and that the said oath taken, all members and each one of them individually shall ratify this steadfast resolution by signature. So the second quote is basically describing the fact that all members of this Third Estate, this now newly designated National Assembly, will continue to hold meetings and stay in place until a constitution has been created. This is the beginnings of the French Revolution, and it is one of the important early phases, and as was mentioned earlier, it's one of the events that have been set into motion by the King Louis XVI calling the Estates General into order for the first time in over 150 years. So let's consider the phases of the French Revolution, and generally there are four phases when we consider the Revolution. We'll leave speaking about the causes for now and go into the actual developments that take place during the 10-year period of the French Revolution. Well, the first one, and obviously you can understand the reason why, between 1789 and 1791, the first phase is called the National Assembly, and that's when the Third Estate, which has been redesignated and combined with the first two estates into the National Assembly, actually take order and begin to write a constitution. The second phase lasts for about a year, between 1791 and 1792, and it's called the Legislative Assembly, and it has to do with the fact that a legislative assembly will be put into place to actually run the French government. Between 1792 and 1795, the third phase is known as the Convention, which deals with the government being run by a revolutionary body called the Convention. And the last period of the French Revolution, between 1795 and 1799, is called the Directory because it refers to the Revolutionary Executive Council or body that was created out of the Convention, known as the Directory, which for that period of time ran the state of France. So let's consider the National Assembly, and remember this from the beginning of the Revolution of 1789 lasts until 1791. Here's a picture, a famous rendition from an artist, showing the storming of Bastille, which is marked as the beginning of the French Revolution, and July 14th is the national holiday, Bastille Day, for the French people. Now, it's important to note that during this period of time, Louis XVI didn't really want a written constitution. His idea was simply to get the three estates to get together and solve the crisis and the dilemma of the financial crisis that had been created and the deficit that the government was forced to deal with. The crisis of lack of revenues and trying to find ways to raise new revenues through new forms of taxation. And when news of his plan actually comes to place where he's going to use military force against the National Assembly, this reaches out, this news, this sort of understanding this might take place, reaches the people in Paris, and women, particularly in Paris, on July 14th actually storm Bastille, and this begins the actual part of the revolution. And there were a number of uprisings in Paris during that time period, during the period of time in which the first phase is known as the National Assembly. And after they stormed Bastille, the citizens of Paris seized a number of weapons because at that point in time, the Bastille was no longer a prison, but basically an arsenal where the French government kept weapons. And so the people seizing these weapons began to organize themselves into a government of their own, and it was called the Commune, and they basically ran Paris. They organized what was called the National Guard, a militia under their control, and it was actually under the command of a noble person by the name of the Marquis de Lafayette. And Lafayette was a moderate nobleman who believed in the ideas of equality and liberty, as he had actually fought in the American Revolution. Now, small groups within these sort of commune, some known as factions, started to compete for control of the city, and so that led to chaos and violence, and so a great deal of upheaval with uprisings taking place in the city of Paris. Now, this uprising in Paris, with the commune taking root there and the various factions competing for control of the city, spread to different parts of France. In fact, many nobles were attacked by various French citizens, and in fact, records of feudal dues, in other words, taxes owed, by the French citizenry, were destroyed. With the ongoing chaos taking place in the country, many nobles fled the country, and Louis XVI actually was forced by the Commune in Paris to fly the new revolutionary flag of France, which is the tricolore, which is the current flag of the country. And here is a picture of the French flag. And as we had talked about in a previous lesson, how in the ideas of nationalism taking root, quite often important symbols become nationalistic portions of identity, and certainly the French flag, the tricolore, is definitely an important symbol of the French Revolution and of French nationalism and of the French national identity today. Now, as time began to move forward, the Paris Commune began to fear that the king would try to bring in foreign troops to put down the rebellion. And they were particularly suspicious because the wife of the king, Marie Antoinette, was actually the sister of the Austrian emperor. She wasn't French to begin with, and they were worried that the brother of Marie Antoinette would bring in Austrian forces to put down the revolt. And so basically what they decide to do is to go to Versailles. A group of women do this, and they force the royal family to relocate in Paris by the National Assembly in one of the royal palaces there, and it's there that the royal family is basically kept as virtual prisoners at the Tuileries Palace in Paris. Let's look at some changes that take place under the National Assembly, that first phase of the revolution. These are important changes to the country of France, both politically, socially, and economically as well. First of all, the National Assembly creates the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Now, this is an important document, not only because it forms a written basis of law for France under revolutionary France, but it's an important declaration that continues to hold influence on politics and thought today. And it was one of the first times in history where equality and liberty as important human rights that all men have was brought forward. The second thing that the National Assembly does is it abolishes all special privileges of the first and second estate. So the burdens of taxation are no longer on simply the merchants, the middle class, and the peasants. They begin to to institute and put into place reforms in local government so that these intendants, these previous representatives of the king that basically acted as tyrants in various regions of France, are removed. And they put into place a constitution of 1791, the first written constitution for France. And they begin to levy or apply taxes based on the idea of the ability to pay. In other words, people pay taxes based on their income, and those who have more pay more, and those who have less pay less. Another thing that the National Assembly did was to get rid of all trade guilds and all labor unions. And something that they put into place as an important part of their Constitution, which was initially part of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, is that all men are equal before the law. It's interesting to note that this refers to men and not women, and so even though there are some radical changes taking place in France under the National Assembly, women do not appear at that time to have the same rights as men. So let's look at the Declaration of Rights of Man for a second, because I had mentioned a few moments ago it's quite an influential document, and it still holds weight with us today, particularly when we consider the ideas of human rights. Well, the first part of the Declaration, the whole idea of liberty, equality, and fraternity, these are quite important sentiments and principles which become the watchwords of the French Revolution and the basic guiding principles of the Revolution. Property rights were guaranteed so that a person can't simply have their property removed without due process. And the right of people to create laws is recognized. In other words, representatives of the people are to create laws in the interests of people and of the citizens of the French country. Another important part of the Declaration of the Rights of Man is that individuals, citizens, have the right to a fair and unbiased trial. In other words, you won't have a judge simply appointed by a king who will always rule in the interest of the king and not always in the interest and the basic equality of people. Freedom of speech was another important declaration of the rights of man. Freedom of the press, in other words, freedom of the media at that time, newspapers, to print what they thought were important newsworthy items or to criticize the government without fear of retribution from the government. So we see a number of important ideas and principles put into place and recognized by the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And we can see why this declaration still is quite influential today. And of course, freedom of religion. At that time in France, under the National Assembly, it was recognized that a person was free to, within reason, to worship as they pleased. How about the Declaration of the Rights of Women? Notice we talked about that there was a Declaration of the Rights of Man and that equality of all men was seen as part of the Constitution and something put into place by the National Assembly. But what about the Declaration of the Rights of Women, particularly when we take into account the fact that women played a very significant role in the French Revolution? Well, there was a journalist, Olympique de Gouges, argued, a French journalist, that there should be a declaration for the rights of women and that women are equal and as well as all citizens and not just men and should benefit from governmental reforms as much as men did. And another French lady, Madame Jeanne Roland, also served as a leader in the women's rights movement and tried to bring about the whole idea of equality for all citizens, and she was able to influence her husband, who happened to be a government official at the time. Now, during the French Revolution, women did gain some rights, but they did not gain all the rights that were given to men. In fact, some rights, such as the ability to inherit property and to reduce the wealth of upper classes, divorce became easier, there was less control of the church over marriage, but in general, women did not get the rights that men were given during the period of the National Assembly of the French Revolution.